Spaghetti review. I never could pull that off. Welcome back to Cooking from Scratch. It's Melissa, and today we're going to try to recreate a recipe that we've only seen done in Cooking Simulator.
That's right. My name is Pewdiepie, and I'm on a mission to make spaghetti.
By Pewdiepie. That's right, we are taking on YouTube's reigning king of subs. He is where YouTube all started, and you know what? He deserves a fine meal. So today we are going to recreate his spaghetti. Just from how we've seen it on Cooking Simulator. We have no written recipe. We're gonna try to do this from scratch, although with hopefully less carnage and general burning. So grab yourself a nice glass of vino, crank up that music, and let's get cooking. Now I should preface this by saying that the spaghetti that Pewdiepie is making isn't your classic spaghetti. It's actually a more Americanized way of making spaghetti, which is spaghetti and meat sauce. And all of this is patterned off of a classic Italian dish called bolognese, which still involves meat, pasta, and tomato sauce, although with bolognese, where you would normally braise a beef shoulder, pork shoulder, blend it in with the tomato sauce, and then it grabs very nicely to some nice tagliatelle. So we're actually going to do Pewdiepie's spaghetti a couple of different ways. One, we're going to try to recreate his recipe just based off his attempts at Cooking Simulator, minus the fire. And then secondly, I'm going to show you guys a more classic recipe, but 3 ways that you can actually boost any spaghetti that you're making. So to get us started on Pewdiepie's version, you're going to need the following. So starting us off with the onion. Pewdiepie actually had a really good tip in his video where he said he doesn't like to cut onion on a wooden board. And I am 100% with him on that. Let's be honest, I tend to mostly just use a wooden board because it looks so much prettier in the videos and in the thumbnails, but really, plastic is where it's at. Plastic doesn't hold on to flavors as much, and then you don't have to worry about onion juice seeping into your board. These are actually a big pain in the ass to care for. However, we're not going to have to chase this onion all over our cutting surface. Though we are going to make one cut. We are going to cut this onion in half. So now here's tip number 1. Instead of sitting here and spending a long time small dicing this onion, we're gonna let the grater do the work. So take your onion, starting at the top, and using the bigger teeth edge of your grater, just run it down. Hopefully this will save him some time and effort. And he doesn't have to chase so much onion across the kitchen.
All right, let's just chop it right here. I'm sick of this.
All right, step 1 done. Now normally I would sweat this in butter, but he used olive oil and I want to keep as much to his recipe as I can. So we're going to add just a little bit of olive oil. Not too much. And then a good helping of salt and pepper. Now what the salt is going to do in here is going to help to start to break down that onion. So that way it's going to incorporate itself a lot better into the sauce. Plus, it's also going to take a lot of the water out of the onion, which will concentrate the flavors a little bit more and make the final sauce not as watery. So we're going to take this and put it onto the stove over medium-low, medium-ish heat. And we're going to sweat this for about 6 minutes or so until the onion becomes very translucent. And now for the mince. So if you're wondering, what the heck is mince? Mince is actually just a short term for minced meat. It's more commonly used in UK. Normally when we talk about minced meat, we're usually talking about hamburger meat, which is an 80-20 ratio of beef, which means 80% lean meat to 20% fat. Now the term mince doesn't necessarily mean beef. It could mean a mince of any kind of meat. So I'm gonna go with the standard Italian meatball kind of mince ratio, which is beef, pork, and usually veal, but I'm gonna hold off on the veal for this because I find that the flavor of the veal really gets lost. So we're gonna stick with 50-50 ratio of beef and pork. So in the pan with our onions, we're gonna crank up the heat to about medium high-ish, and we're gonna crumble in our beef and our pork. We wanna get a good sear on this, and there should be enough oil in the pan that it shouldn't stick. Be sure to salt and pepper this liberally, and once the meat is nicely browned on one side, flip it over. You can continue to break it down a little bit if you like it in smaller pieces, and brown it on the other side until the meat is completely cooked through. Be sure to add in a good couple of shakes of dried oregano. You don't want to use fresh for this, and I'll tell you why shortly. So once the meat has browned on one side, you want to flip it over, and when you do, that's when you want to add your tomato sauce. Turn the temperature down to about medium-low, cover the pan, and we're gonna let this slowly simmer and finish cooking the rest of the meat in the sauce. So why use dried oregano when everyone says fresh is best? When it comes to methods of slow cooking, dried is actually your best friend. The problem with using fresh herbs early on when you're going to be cooking something for a long time is that they're going to turn brown and not look that good in the final dish. So for dishes like this, where this is going to sit for a little bit, you actually do want to use dried. However, be careful. Flavor in dried is more concentrated than the flavor in fresh. So if they don't tell you how much to use, or if you want to use dried in place of fresh, only use about half of the stated amount in the recipe. Now while that's going, let's turn our attention to the pasta, and especially the pasta water. This tip will transform any pasta dish. If at any point pasta is going to be introduced to water, introduce that water to salt. For your standard pot of boiling water, I would use about a tiny handful of salt. This would be about 1 to 2 tablespoons. Now, any Italian grandmother will tell you that your pasta water should taste like the sea. That's about the indication of how much salt that you want to put into your water. So what is this doing for the pasta? Salt has some pretty amazing abilities, and we'll dedicate a whole video to that. But just for the terms of pasta, salt in water is the only thing that's going to be able to season the pasta from within. Now, is it going to make your pasta taste like salt? No. It's basically going to make your pasta taste like pasta. It's very hard to explain if you've never had pasta that's been cooked in salted water, but let me tell you, it's not supposed to taste like paper. So we're going to put this on the stove, turn it up to high, and make sure this comes to a full boil before we introduce our pasta. Now, here is the only point where I'm going to take some creative license here. I know Pewdiepie did not use it in his video, but for the purposes of this, I'm actually not going to use regular spaghetti. I'm going to use one. They call it gnocchi. This isn't gnocchi. This is kind of shaped like it. Now, the reason why that I'm using this instead of regular spaghetti is a reason why that most times you don't find tomato and meat sauce in Italy, is the fact that structurally speaking, the two don't work together. You have bite sizes of meat and long strands of spaghetti, and trying to get both on a fork without having all that winding up in your lap, it's a pain in the. So for this, we're actually going to use something that does a little bit better job of actually holding the meat. Is this necessary? No, you can use regular spaghetti if that's what you like, but if you can find it, give this a try. You may find the dish works a little bit better. So once the pasta is done, and if you want to know when it's done, check the instructions on the box. I'll be sure to tell you. Drain the pasta into a colander, I think he called it.
Oh, colander, that's what it's called.
Or as the rest of us tend to know it as, a colander. All right, I lied. I'm going to take 2 creative licenses with his recipe. And I'll chalk it up to the fact that Cooking Simulator is very rigid in its mechanics. 20 grams, too big pot. Okay. I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say. Why do you say that? While putting pasta on a plate and pouring sauce over it makes it look very Instagrammy, it's not the best way. The best way to really cook any kind of pasta dish is to finish the pasta in the sauce. So we're going to take our pasta from the colander, we're going to pour it into our sauce, and we're going to let it cook for about 2 more minutes. So what this is doing is basically taking that little bit of pasta water that's clinging to the noodles and incorporate it into the sauce. So it's going to season it a little bit more, plus the starches that are in the water are going to help the sauce to cling better to the pasta. So it may not look as Instagrammy, but I bet you anything it's going to taste a whole lot better. So now that we've replicated Pewdiepie's spaghetti, let's make a more classic version. Let's say it's late in the night and all you've got is some tomatoes, some onions, some garlic, and a little bit of basil, and you're just craving some spaghetti. Well, I've got a super easy recipe for you, plus a little bit of magic to add that will knock your socks off. So this one starts pretty much in the same fashion. We're gonna take half of an onion. Now these are yellow onions and they are a little bit sweeter than your standard white onion. I like to use these because if the tomatoes really aren't in season, the white onions I find are a little bit too tart, bitter, I don't know what the right word for it is. Whereas the yellow onions add a little bit more sweetness where the sweetness would normally come from the tomatoes. So we're gonna grate ourselves some onion. Not too much because we're not going to be adding meat to this. Now this version is vegetarian, but it is not vegan because we will be using butter. So same thing, we're going to add some salt, a good amount of salt, and pepper. But for my version, I like to kick the spice up a little bit, so I'm going to be adding some red chili flake. Now, whereas Pewdiepie only did his in olive oil, I'm going to do mine in a blend of olive oil and butter. More butter than olive oil. Plus, one of the joys of being single is that you can pile in as much garlic as you possibly want. I like to add just enough to offend the table that's 3 away from mine. Okay, we're gonna stick this on the burner over again, a medium to medium low heat because we're going to sweat, which means we don't want to put color on this. We basically just want to get all that water out of the onions and start to cook these down. Now, similar to Pew's, I actually don't like using a wooden cutting board, especially when I'm cutting things like tomatoes. So we're gonna take our little cherry tomatoes, or if you can't find cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes work just as well. And we're gonna cut these down into fourths. Now I have talked to some of you guys about your favorite ways of doing spaghetti, and a few of you have told me that you don't like spaghetti sauce that's not absolutely pureed, and I'm totally with you on that one. Just know that this version is definitely a more rustic version of a tomato sauce, so there will be pieces of tomato. However, if that's not your thing, you can always replace the tomatoes with actual tomato sauce. Now, once your tomatoes are ready and your onion and your garlic have sweated, add the tomatoes to the pan, crank up the heat to about medium high, and be sure to add a little bit more of salt and pepper. So now, secret number 1 to an amazing tomato sauce: wine. Not only does this impart a nice, fruity, juicy flavor that will really complement the tomatoes, but tomatoes are a little bit of a strange character. They have flavor compounds that are water soluble, plus they also have flavor compounds that are what we call alcohol soluble, which means you're not getting those flavors out without a little bit of vino. See, not just for the cook. Now, what kind of wine to use? Pretty much anything you'd like to drink, though I would stick with something that's a little bit fruity and a little bit juicy. A couple good ones are Pinot Grigio on the whites, or for the reds, this one's just basically a red table wine that happened to be decently priced, and it's a nice young wine, so it's not going to be super, what they call dusty, or the old vines. So take your glass and pour in a couple of good glugs of wine in with the tomatoes. Once you're done drinking it, of course. Now the pasta is going to be done exactly the same way as we did Pewdiepie's, which is salt your water, bring it to a boil, and for this one we are going to use spaghetti, but you can really use any kind of pasta that you like. Cook it to the number of minutes that it says. This one says it cooks in 12 minutes. Drain it, and then we're going to add it to our sauce. So just to finish off our sauce, we're going to add in what we call a chiffonade of basil, which is just fancy French speak for cut into ribbons. An easy way to do that is just take your basil leaves, lie them on top of each other, roll them up like a candy cigarette, because this is YouTube. Take your chef's knife and just mow on through. Okay, I've been promising this to you guys, folks, and here it is. The one ingredient that completely transforms a tomato sauce, and you add it just at the end. Yep, it's our old friend butter. Something about it, I don't know, it just adds a little bit of creaminess, adds a little additional salt, and just trust me on this. So once the tomatoes have finished cooking, basically they're broken down to where they're still a little bit chunky, but can be mashed a little bit. You want to turn your heat to low. That's where we're going to add in not only the basil, but also a good generous pat of butter. Crank the heat completely off, stir it together until the butter just starts to incorporate. Then take your pasta, add it to the dish, give it a good stir, and you're ready to go. And there you have it, 2 different takes on spaghetti. Hope you guys have enjoyed this, and if by some miracle Pewdiepie is watching this, I hope I did right by your recipe. Curious to hear what you think about it, and curious to hear what you guys have to think about not only these recipes, but how do you like to make your spaghetti? Let me know down in the comments down below. If you'd like to get more tips and tricks like this in your weekly playlist, if you want to hit that subscribe button down below, that would be awesome, and I will see you, awesome people, in our next video. Cheers!